I had a brain fart. What was your second question?
Do you think that there's nothing inherently political about 40k? Like it sort of just exists in an apolitical vacuum?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we can quote. We have quotes from Rick Priestley. We have quotes from Andy Chambers.
A few moments later.
Everything was, fine. Governments that are, because the Imperium is ultimately not fascist, because it is incredibly decentralized. It's it's a feudal. It is. Let's see. What is the actual full definition? What was the actual full definition? Feudal, tributary, oligarchical empire, theocratic empire.
More moments later.
I mean, the Imperium itself, its core government, is ultimately a form of democracy. It's an oligarchical democracy made up of, representatives of organizations that, with the way the Imperium is structured, are more or less separate nations in their own right.
Do you think that there's nothing inherently political about 40k?
Oh, absolutely. The idea that any and all art is inherently political is fallacy. Because, and this is what it boils down to, the author's intent matters.
I do actually want to extend the olive branch here. I want to try to make it seem like we're all adults, we're all people, we all have the right to be treated with at least some respect as long as we don't do anything to take that away, to justify that being taken away. Like, I'm going to give you the same level of respect that I should anybody else. I've been a little bit toxic in the past. I'm pretty sure all of us have been toxic. I'm going to stop trying to do that because I want to prove that this is about, again, this Discord will stay up with the intent of staying civil.
We don't want you playing. I mean, even the Warhammer is for everyone. I mean, statement. It's certainly a selective interpretation to say, okay, it's for everyone, but if you're adding a but to Warhammer is for everyone, you're missing the point of the statement. Because everyone is everyone. And everyone has a very, very strict definition. Every person. And maybe a couple interns have gone off and posted things, gone off half-cocked. But company policy says otherwise. Company position says otherwise. There's a definite lack of willingness to acknowledge troublemakers on one's own side. We've seen the wokehammer people hurling abuses. We've seen them making things up and accusing people of things, calling people all kinds of horrible things based, as I've said before, on nothing. I'd say at the end, that's what the whole gatekeep thing is really about. Like, from the Chudhammer side of things, we don't give a shit what you are, who you are, etc., where you come from. As long as you're leaving your crap at the door, all that crap that doesn't matter when you enter the hobby, that's all that really matters.
So I'm wondering what specific instances you have of people being nasty and how that is indicative of wokehammer or even just progressive people who participate in the hobby in general, because I can point out to specific as well, and I've had plenty of abuses hurled at me. I've had plenty of instances of interactions with Chudhammer where I will... I mean, hell, a lot of this started with female space marines, and I'll say that I'm for it, and then somebody says, oh, you're trans, you're a pedophile. So I'm wondering what equivalent instances do you have besides somebody expressing their opinion and then somebody saying, like, hey, your opinion aligns with this really insane ideology called the Nazis?
So when you're trying to impress, the Thuramine argument and death of the author to try to say, well, okay, Warhammer is actually political, you're trying to let your goldfish loose in the lake. The goldfish being your interpretation, the lake being effectively the truth here. And you can have an interpretation, but you have to stop and realize My interpretation dies outside my own head. The goldfish can't live in the lake. It's a goldfish that can't survive outside the bowl. It's like that one skit of the gay guy who realizes at the end he's not oppressed, he's just an asshole. That's basically it. The problem that I see is from the people from, we'll just call them, for the sake of having identities to call them by, the Wokehammer side, is that the frequent attacks on people, calling them chuds, calling them Nazis, calling them isms, and often based on essentially nothing. And the problem with stating all this as satire is that it's so patently ridiculous and at the same time justifying of the way the Imperium views things. Rick Priestley himself said it. The Imperium is the way it is because the galaxy around them forced them to be that way. And even when they tried to be better, when the Emperor tried to make humanity better, Chaos found a way to worm in and ruin it all. Like, that's what 40k is trying to say. It's a narrative couched in the existence of the universe they created, and not a parallel to the real world. The problems that the Imperium faces, nothing in.
Running short on time.
I'm about to finish. I know.
Sure.
The problems the Imperium faces, we don't have problems on that level in reality. And that's just a simple fact.
But specifically just that whole, like, well, we'd like to be better, but damn, you're just forcing our hand at every turn with this. That describes the final solution. That was their justification for that thing. Do I dare join the general tab of this server? I guess I should. Hold on one moment. Oh no, I'm not linking the server. I was just kind of wondering out loud if I should join in. Yeah. I'll join their.
I don't know.
Hello, Shed.
Hello.
Hola.
Hello.
Como
Word.
esta?
It's so
Ian.
nice to finally meet you.
Cool. Thank you. Nice to meet all you too.
Very quickly, I was checking your profile. You use she/her, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Yep.
Yo, what's up, guys? How you guys doing?
How's it going?
Hello.
Like I
Good.
said,
No,
we're
got
just
my-
in general for a couple minutes until it's time.
Yeah, makes sense.
I'm gonna make an announcement right now. Just let everybody know what's going on.
Yeah, I got it. I got the meme ready and everything.
Also, they're starting to roll out the new usernames. Kind of wild.
I am not a fan of it.
Aw.
I like it.
I don't like it. Nobody
But
likes.
I like the numbers.
Yeah.
I'm going to miss the numbers, but you know, it's interesting.
There,
It's a change.
there we go. The meme has been posted.
There was a meme.
Yeah, debate discussion.
Oh.
I thought that was
Alright.
I thought that
No.
chat's supposed to be for posting
I'll
questions.
delete it.
and-
I'll delete it. I'll delete it.
Get that out of there.
Hey.
Important evidence.
What?
Yeah,
How is that
that I'm based and I love Ace Combat.
Is that from Ace Combat?
yeah.
I don't get the
Yeah,
name.
yeah, that's Zero Wing Pixie from Ace Combat Zero.
I thought the
What's
name
Ace-
was like Virgil.
You know, hey buddy, still alive? That guy?
What's Ace Combat?
I do not have the 3 hours to dedicate to this. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Huh?
Do
we
you
have
know
3
what
minutes until the
Area
debate,
88
and you
is?
need 3 hours to describe that.
So-
I'm talking to you.
Okay. I'll give you the quick version. It all started at the birth
Three
of the
sentences.
universe.
3 sentences. 3 sentences max, please.
Fighter jets are fucking awesome. There, that's it.
Okay, you know that works.
I don't get the. It's. Oh, okay. Now I found the original meme.
Okay,
image
I need to
of Rick
do-
Stein.
I apologize to everybody involved right now. I'm sending an ad to everyone.
All right, I need to do my stream intro, so I'm gonna head off to the debate room, mute myself real quick, and I'll see you there.
Yep,
Pop, pop.
I'm moving over there as well.
Well, good luck.
Thank you. Oh, I forgot it's push to talk. I have to figure out a way to do push to talk. Damn.
I might disable that, but I might also, in case interruptions happen, I might just be toggling mute on you guys if it gets that. I don't think it will, but if it does, that'll be what happens. So I'm gonna turn that rule off right now.
Oh. Read my mind, and by reading my mind, watching the stream.
I am watching your stream just because I just had it open just to make sure that because I saw that you were on. That's all. And let's see. Use voice activity is set to normal rules. There you go. Alright, when Bohemond gives me the confirmation that he's ready. By the way, you should be able to unmute yourselves now, Shay and Marshall.
Not unless I do push to talk.
Okay, testing. Are coming through?
I can hear you.
Oh, is it work? How do I?
That you're unmuted, but I don't hear you speaking except for in your stream.
Oh, I don't have a push to talk even. How's this?
It's good. I did turn that off, by the way. You can go back to voice activity if you want.
Okay. I might have to rejoin the channel. Hold on.
Huh. Still not working. Let me go in and override your permissions specifically. Permissions, debate participant. It is allowing...
I accidentally made things difficult.
No, Discord's being dumb. That's, there we go.
Oh, nice.
Okay. So, I believe we are ready to start, if everybody's okay with this.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. I'm gonna... Sorry, I apologize in advance. I'm reading this off the script, because otherwise I'm going to be stuttering more than I normally do. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dreadnought Alfarius, and I am the moderator for the first of hopefully many civil debates between both sides of the online Warhammer community. Representing what has been colloquially referred to as Chudhammer, we have Marshal Bohemond, a fan of the lore and one of the more well-known elements of his side of the discussion. And representing those who have been referred to as Wokehammer is Demon Fae Shay, a fellow fan of the hobby but with significantly varied views from Bowman's side. The topic of today's debate is gatekeeping and why it is either good or bad for a hobby community. I'll be presenting 3 questions pertaining to the topic, and both people will have a chance to answer the question and provide a rebuttal to each question. I'll be limited time on each of these segments to 5 minutes per person, totaling a maximum of 30 minutes of speaking time for each party. A reminder to everyone here that this is a civil discussion. There are to be no personal attacks, calls for violence, etc. Furthermore, I'll be attempting to limit interrupting to one another to keep with the format, and I will also be making a point to call out certain logical fallacies such as strawman, slippery slope, cherry picking, usage of anecdotal evidence, and so on. And the 3 questions in order will be, how would you define gatekeeping? Do you think that Games Workshop as a company is actively keeping any new players from participating due to representation, lack thereof, or other policies? And do you think gatekeeping a hobby community is good, and why or why not? To start this, for each question, I will randomly determine who starts with their opening statement on it. I'll be using random.org, and on odds, it'll be Shay starting. On evens, it'll be Bowman starting. And I'll do this for all 3 questions. So to begin, random.org is open, generating a random number between 1 and 100. The number is 43. Shay, you have the floor for the first question, which is, how would you define gatekeeping?
Okay. I would define gatekeeping as wanting to keep... Well, I mean, I guess if you want to apply it to hobby terms, it's keeping either a person or a certain group of people out of your hobby. It could be for any reason. I mean, I suppose you could even take, what's it called? DW's statement, Warhammer is for everyone, but they were trying to specifically hit out, like, we don't want to see, like, unironic, fascism, or, I forget what they actually, like, specifically called out, but I guess that could be considered it, if you wanted to be broad. Just generally trying to keep people out of the space.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add?
Not really. It's, as I would say it's just a very broad definition.
And that's completely fair. Bowman, how would you define gatekeeping in this particular circumstance?
Well, I would define gatekeeping pretty much the same way, in that it is a matter of keeping people, it is a matter of keeping people out of a hobby, or it doesn't have to be a hobby. It can be anything that people could join, but essentially a method of keeping people out. What I would say the Where I would say my definition differs is that when it comes to gatekeeping, it can be a healthy method of ensuring that how do I word it? A healthy way of ensuring that the community itself remains, free of toxicity and free of unrelated politics from the outside world that go against the essential escapism of playing, like, say, a tabletop game. Which, an unfortunate truth is that there are people trying to use the concept of gatekeeping as a way to, on one hand, say, oh, these certain political groups need to go. But at the same time, saying gatekeeping is a bad thing. And really, there's a hypocrisy of the people who want to, on the one hand, smear one side as gatekeepers, but at the other hand, gatekeep arguably more than they do. And it's a very serious point of misunderstanding between the two sides, that between these two definitions of gatekeeping.
Okay, real quick before we continue, Shay, one of the people viewing has said that outside of the actual Discord chat here, it is hard to hear you. So on somebody else's stream, for example, specifically Bowman's stream, the people watching from him, it is quite quiet.
I turned Shay up. I apologize for that.
Okay, no, then that fixes the problem.
That's a common problem with my mic. I sort of overcorrected when filtering it in the noise gate, because legitimately the first time I turned this mic on, I could hear what was going on the other side of the house. It was like a directional microphone.
Shay, listen, I have to apologize. I committed the common mistake where I forget to unmute the my desktop audio when I switch over.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm an idiot. That's on me. But that's on me.
So, then anyway, back to the thing. Shay, do you have a rebuttal for Bowman's definition and elaboration?
I don't necessarily disagree with the overall definition. And I agree that it's, a kind of a neutral definition. There's nothing inherently good or bad about gatekeeping. It all depends on what you are trying to do with the space. One thing that I think that needs to get pointed out about gatekeeping, as a lot of people on Twitter talk about it, I don't think it's something that you can actually succeed in doing. I mean, say for instance, even if I wanted to keep out, I don't know, anybody who had bigoted views out of 40k, I can't, do that, and I can't stop them from engaging with the hobby in at least some way. Then that's kind of not really the point either. Yeah, I don't think there's any morality to gatekeeping. It just depends on what you're trying to do. It depends on what your morals actually are. That's why I say that, the example that Warhammer, Games Workshop does themselves, Warhammer's for everyone, but we want to exclude certain kinds of people in order to be potentially inclusive to the most amount of people as possible. That's like an exercise of the tolerance doctrine, If you foster a space that has a certain amount of people who are actively trying to make people uncomfortable in it, then that's just going to be a bad time for everybody. But even GW couldn't, keep everybody out of their game. What are they going to do? Everybody who goes onto their website and buys a starter pack is going to get a background check? That's just ridiculous.
Fair. Bowman, do you have a response to that?
You see, My apologies. I just put a bunch of Z's into Discord on accident. Yeah, I put the Warhammer is for everyone. The picture of that in the Discord chat. But the only thing I have to say to that is that there's like I see where you're coming from. We're trying to say it's ultimately neutral and ultimately can't do anything. The problem is that the problem that I see is from the people from, we'll just call them, for the sake of having identities to call them by, the Wokehammer side, is that the frequent attacks on people, calling them chuds, calling them Nazis, calling them isms, and often based on essentially nothing. Accusations apropos to nothing, or the now frequent problem of where are your minis? Because you're saying that on the one hand, Games Workshop's statement of Warhammer is for everyone is inherently a gatekeeping statement, but on the other hand, we see this point of, well, where are your minis? Why don't you have minis? You're not a fan, you don't have minis. And well, Games Workshop themselves have said minis are not essential to be a Warhammer fan. Their most recent "What is Warhammer" video that they have on that they put up on, like, say, YouTube, and that they showed with the release of with the debut of 10th edition, the reveal of it, shows that they, as a company, do not see minis as something you need to partake in. You don't even need to partake in the game, because they consider video games, books, and all, everything that is related to Warhammer part of the hobby. And it is a notable fact that only one side is trying to gatekeep financially. So my question is, if gatekeeping is this neutral thing that your side considers to not really work, I'd say it comes down to a point of, then why is it a problem to crusade against in the first place? And then why do you do it yourself? Especially in ways that have absolutely nothing to do to toxicity and everything due to, say, financial status, or whether somebody would even be interested in buying minis or painting. Like, why books? Why video games? Why gatekeep those people who enjoy that part? That doesn't make any sense from the perspective that you find gatekeeping a neutral thing.
So, Shay, since normally we would be moving on to the next question here, but you have not used a significant chunk of your time, neither has Bohemond. And since you started, I will give you a chance for another 3 minutes to comment on what the question Bohemond just posed to you, if you would like.
Okay.
And yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. If you can bring up, anecdotes of that happening. I've certainly seen my own instances of somebody. I hate to call it Shuthammer, because that's a silly name. But from
I picked it as a joke because Wokehammer L's uses that now for us, so it's funny. That's why I picked it.
Okay, that works then. I'll use that for identifier. But yeah, I've seen plenty of people on Hammer who do similar type things. Not like not even just like financially. It's just generally like purity testing, like how much do you know about the lore, how much do you know about this aspect of the hobby. And yeah, I agree with you that, and I agree with, by extension, GW's statement. The statement of any publisher within tabletop gaming is that you don't have to do everything in order to be a fan. You don't have to, buy the minis and everything to be a fan. I think a really big example of this is, like, I think with 5th edition D&D, Wizards even just came out and said, you could strip this game of most of its rules and you can still say you're playing D&D. That's perfectly fine. They're a company. I bet they would wish that you would, buy all of their stuff, obviously. But yeah, I don't think that that's I don't think that that's a thing. The reason that it comes up is because if somebody starts in the position that they need to gatekeep somebody out of the hobby in order to protect it, to keep it healthy, something that I've never really seen to be descriptive fact is just taken as a prescriptive statement. It's weird when people do that when they themselves have not engaged with the base hobby in a certain way. It's sort of just... Maybe it's vaguely gesturing at imagined hypocrisy depending upon their engagement in other areas, but it is very strange, because for somebody who has not put, like... I think you and I could both agree that, you know, sitting down with a tabletop game is a very, very involved extension of dealing with the hobby. That takes not just money, that takes a lot of your time and effort and personal creativity to make happen. So for somebody who doesn't engage with that, you call someone who does and has been doing so for 10, 20, 30 years, it kind of stinks of not an imagined hypocrisy, an actual hypocrisy in the statement of gatekeeping. This is somebody who has not just financially contributed to Games Workshop, but has, you know, probably been in events, probably been in multiple aspects of 40k, because that is... an engagement with that aspect of it is kind of a barometer for how much they engage with the rest of it, if that makes any sense. I mean, you could find instances of people who do the models, do the game, and don't do anything else with it. But, typically from what I've found with fans, even my boyfriend, it's... no. If you're into the plastic crack, you're probably into everything else. You're far gone, you've been hooked in.
Okay, and that would be the time for that would be the time. Now, since we have kind of talked on it and the company has been mentioned, we don't need to spend as much time on this particular subject, but do you think in its current iteration, Games Workshop is actively gatekeeping people for any reason other than financially? And Bohemond, I rolled the number, it was even.
Hello?
Did I get disconnected momentarily?
I don't know, but I think everyone did. It's Discord being Discord. Okay. My actual rebuttal starting here.
Go ahead.
I would say, well, obviously, other than charging like $60 for a box of intercessors, no. And I would find the idea that GW actually follows some kind of "we don't want you playing Warhammer" stance patently ridiculous. Because, I mean, for starters, we're talking a company that wants money, and in the face of all that's gone on with the infiltration of hobbies, has held out and takes a very firm stance against, not interjecting politics into their hobby, or not, making statements of "we don't want you playing." I mean, even the Warhammer is for everyone. I mean, statement. It's certainly a selective interpretation to say, okay, it's for everyone, but if you're adding a "but" to Warhammer is for everyone, you're missing the point of the statement, because everyone is everyone, and everyone has a very, very strict definition. Every person. So, and Games Workshop, we all know, is protective of the vision of their IP. We know they've, gone after authors who try to insert their own authors for trying to insert unrelated real world bullshit into their books. And they want to keep things as escapist as possible, and that includes, not telling customers, no, we don't like you, leave. And maybe a couple interns have gone off and posted things, gone off half-cocked. But company policy says otherwise. Company position says otherwise. And yeah, I will say they should lower their prices, holy shit. But, The idea they don't want people playing Warhammer is stupid, and it's rooted in nothing.
Okay. Okay. Answer with your opinion on whether or not Games Workshop is actively doing anything that is gatekeeping other than financially, which I think we can all agree that the prices are too damn high. I shouldn't have to pay $60 for 5 models.
No. Yeah, no, that's an issue I have too. Yeah, no, it keeps getting thrown up. That's sort of because it's very related to the Warhammer is for everyone. It's very explicitly by the wording of it. Oh, let me just go up to it in the Discord. Where did they? Yeah, if you feel the same way wherever and whoever you are, we're glad you are part of the Warhammer community. If not, you will not be missed. Like that's just a statement that's inherently just saying like, okay, we would rather not have you. That's a strong statement for a company to make. At least at the time it was. Nowadays it's sort of wrapped up in general rainbow capitalism and, you know, company statements on inclusivity. Yeah, no, I think that is inherently gatekeeping, but it's gatekeeping people based off of what the company holds as its morals. It's gatekeeping them based off of like, hey, if we see you injecting the hobby with your own prejudices in order to abuse your fellow players in any way, verbally, physically, whatever, we want you gone. You won't be invited to hobby spaces. This has happened plenty of times. But like I said, there's no way that they can 100% enforce it. That doesn't mean that it's not their intention by what they're doing. It's whatever. Otherwise, no, I don't think that they... I don't think that they're actually like making an effort to exclude anybody. I don't think that the representation is necessarily bad. I am in favor of female Space Marines, but I could take them or leave them. The reason that I think that they're nice, the reason that I sort of, kind of cool with a lot of changes like that is that I remember coming into the hobby and I remember a lot of people telling me that, if you want to get into this, play Sisters. That's where you belong, and sort of getting shuffled along to that part of the hobby and then reading into the history. It's like, okay, well, where do they come into the setting? What's their first codex? And it has this short spiel about how they were like warrior consorts for like the worst leader that the Imperium has ever had. And it's like, oh, that doesn't feel good. That doesn't feel good at all that this is my place in the hobby. That's why I'm kind of for representation, however people may deem that they want it. It's ultimately Games Workshop's decision to make it, and whether or not they make them or not, I'll still be in it because love me guard. Yeah, I don't think they do a bad job with inclusivity, but I do think that they have made an effort, despite, funnily enough, what the setting is, keeping what they see as the bigots out. And I'm cool with that.
Okay. Bowman, to your rebuttal?
I'd say if I was going to offer a rebuttal to that, I mean, I'd say I would focus on the whole idea that you're saying there, through saying Warhammer is for everyone, either saying this specific group of troublemakers can't partake. Now, I'd say the problem is that there's a definite lack of willingness to acknowledge troublemakers on one's own side. I mean, trying to think of a way to word this nicely. Because, I mean, let's be real. The side saying Warhammer is for everyone, using that as a bludgeon against people, would that not apply to them too? Being a troublemaker in the hobby is not, it's not a, and this is me taking a centrist stance, appreciate this. It is not a one-side issue. like, I'll fully acknowledge there have been people, who cause trouble. I question whether the Austrian painter from that one tournament was actually a fascist. I mean, based on what he did, he was more trying to troll for easy victories in a tournament. Still a troublemaker. Should still get kicked out for doing that. I don't disagree with that at all. But then again, we've seen, people from more specifically because it's the side that thinks they're doing no wrong. We've seen the Warhammer people hurling abuses. We've seen them making things up and accusing people of things, calling people all kinds of horrible things based, as I've said before, on nothing but presumption. It's like, oh, we presume you are the bad guys, therefore you should not be playing Warhammer, and therefore this statement of Games Workshop that shops that you will not be missed only applies to you. I generally view it as a more neutral statement. It is applying to anyone who would raise hell and cause trouble and ruin things for everyone. I don't view it as so exclusive a warning that only one group should leave. It would be anyone who can't check their bullshit out the door when they sit down to play a game with somebody. And I'd say at the end, that's what the whole gatekeep thing is really about. Like, from the Chudhammer side of things, we don't give a shit what you are, who you are, etc., where you come from. As long as you're leaving your crap at the door, all that crap that doesn't matter when you enter the hobby, that's all that really matters. I think there needs to be a greater understanding of that from a certain side of the situation, that this is for everyone is not pointed, it's neutral.
Okay. Shay, do you have a rebuttal to that statement?
Yeah. We can sort of, be very both sides about this and sort of dance around vaguely. There's so much for the tolerant left meme about it, but I don't necessarily do both sides arguments. I kind of look at the utility of things. So if both people are committing the same action, then you look at why they're doing it. You see that Warhammer people are trying to gatekeep out of their own spaces people who, in their gatekeeping, are trying to keep people out for identities. That's sort of what Warhammer means by everyone. It's a stand-in for every identity. That's why they go into that second paragraph, I believe, that they won't like bigotry, prejudice, anything like that. Those aren't equivalent actions. I don't think that it's because one is trying to make trouble and the other is they just showed up and somebody took a problem with it. So I'm wondering what specific instances you have of people being nasty and how that is indicative of Warhammer or even just progressive people who participate in the hobby in general, because I can point out to specific as well, and I've had plenty of abuses hurled at me. I've had plenty of instances of interactions with Chudhammer where I will... I mean, hell, a lot of this started with female space marines, and I'll say that I'm for it, and then somebody says, oh, you're trans, you're a pedophile. Just because of my identity. So I'm wondering what equivalent instances do you have besides somebody expressing their opinion and somebody saying like, hey, your opinion aligns with this really insane ideology called the Nazis? Just by sort of how the ideology works. Like what's some equivalent harms being done by the other side to make this more than just kind of one-sided utilitarianism.
Okay. And since I also base on the last subject, moment, if you like, you have some time to respond as well. A little bit less though, because you have used most of your time so far. So begin.
I'd say if I was gonna give any examples, I'd say, all the plenty of examples. I posted a few there in the chat. I could search some up right now too if I wished. Primarily, let's see, denial of the fact that I'm gay, for starters. I mean, it takes a special kind of bigoted for a guy to say he's gay, stream with his boyfriend, on Twitch, playing Darktide together. Fully admit, he knows who artists who do gay porn are because he's gay, and still have people claiming it's not true. I mean, I'd say there's a major problem here that you believe your side is immune to committing bigotry when it's not. It's not immune, and in fact, the problem is that you believe you're so immune that I'd say you project that. I mean, it's kind of hard to call people bigots, like say call the Legion bigots when there's people who are white, black, atheist, Catholic, straight, gay, trans among them. It's a very disingenuous kind of thing to assume people are bigots just because this is what the crowd has said. This is who the crowd has designated. And we're willing to admit we're assholes, but I feel like the other side needs to wake up. They need to wake up and realize there's a reason people don't like them. It has nothing to do with the fact they may be trans, gay, whatever. It's the fact that they look at, just normal people who don't want to get involved with identity politics and don't want to get involved with, and by normal, I mean like all walks of life, but outside the identity politics issue, they don't want anything to do with it regardless of what their race, gender identity, orientation is. They don't want anything to do with the politics and get called Nazi, racist, transphobe, etc. Just for that. I feel like the other side needs to wake up to the fact that they are just as big a bunch of bigots, if not worse.
Okay. And now, real quick, we've already had this kind of touched on, and we can kind of see where people's opinions fall on this. But just to ask the last question, and then we'll leave it to a slightly more free form for as long as you guys would like. I'll still moderate time and back and forth on that, just to make sure that we don't go into shit slinging and being at each other's throats. But the final question: do you think gatekeeping a hobbies community, for whatever reason, whatever that reason may be, is good? And if so, why would you say it's good? And why would you say it's not? We're going to randomly select now who will be taking the lead on that. And Jay, you have the lead.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think that gatekeeping is necessary to the hobby. I mean, like I said before, it's good to oftentimes in spaces keep people who want to make trouble for others, people who want to hurl abuses, be bigoted, sexist, the whole gambit of being a dick to another human being just for a dumb reason. It's good to kind of keep them out of spaces, keep them out of tournaments. If they do that shit in a shop, just, ask them to leave. But it's not like you can keep them out of your hobby 100%. I don't think it's inherently necessary to the health of a game. Just to steel man the argument that I see from Chudhammer a lot, that you have to do it, or else you're going to have some instance of insert go woke, go broke here. That doesn't seem to be happening in 40k. I mean, you can check their financial statements. They're public record. Ever since, I think the year that the Primaris got introduced, that was when a lot of people in the community sort of decided that 40k went woke. They've had constant profit since then, so it hasn't hurt them financially. the reason that they're increasing their prices right now seems to be a logistical nightmare on their end in terms of creating miniatures and putting out product. It doesn't seem to be related to any particular design lore decisions, inclusivity decisions. Just seems to be on that merit. You could talk about whether or not the health of the hobby is maintained through, is the lore okay? 40k is a really bad example to use for this because all of us here, if we go back long enough, we know that there has been lore that has been incredibly retconned between editions. You look at first, sometimes even third edition, they look barely recognizable to the 40k that we all interact with today. It just, there are that many differences. I mean, you could really go back to somebody who first started with Rogue Trader could make a similar argument against all of the changes that have happened since. And I think that we would think that they're being a little hyperbolic about everything. One, because their version of the rules still exists, and two, nobody seems to have been particularly bothered by the situation we're in now. Except for, instances here and there of, like, where we could be more inclusive. But most of the sentiment I see is they could take it or leave it. They sort of just enjoy doing their own thing in 40k.
Okay. And Bohemond?
I'd fundamentally disagree on the argument that people said Games Workshop, air quotes, went woke with Primaris. Nobody disliked Primaris because it was, because they thought it was woke. They disliked Primaris because they came out of nowhere with very little foundational lore to justify their existence. But that's not the point being made here at all. This isn't a lore argument at all. It's the idea that gatekeeping is somehow impossible and isn't healthy for the hobby. It is I would say it is healthy for the hobby. It's healthy for the hobby because it reminds people, you don't, what you are, like who you are, your identity, etc. We don't care, but it's the simple rule of when you're entering this space, this hobby space, leave your bullshit at the door. Nobody cares about your politics. Nobody cares about any of that. Just come in and have fun, and don't spoil the fun for everyone. And that's all we believe. Just leave everything not related to the hobby at the door. And I would argue there's definitely a degree of people who can't drop their narcissism in that regard. But that's all gatekeeping really is. And at the end of the day, I would say that is effective, because people who can't leave their politics, who can't leave their identity politics at the door and just be a fan, are going to have a bad time. And it's not because of Games Workshop. It's not really because of the fans. It's because it's like that one skit of the gay guy who realizes at the end he's not oppressed, he's just an asshole. That's basically it. That's basically it at the end of the day. I was out and playing Warhammer in like the late 90s and nobody cared. And that never changed. I would say it's just a lot of the newer people coming in are trying to drag their identity politics in with them, and nobody cares about them. They just don't want the identity politics in the hobby. And that's really the cut and dry of it.
Okay. Shay, you have room for rebuttal here?
Okay. Yeah, certainly no homophobia in the 90s. I guess I have a few questions then. With the last topic, you brought up your sexuality as sort of like you believe it's hypocritical for people to think that you could have a bigoted view when you yourself are a certain sexual identity. Why do you think that isn't in itself also identity politics? Do you think that Warhammer 40k is not in any way inherently political in how it is made? Like, do you think it sort of just exists? Like, all of this just exists in a vacuum?
Well, on the first point, I mean, if it wasn't for the Warhammer side, I probably would have never brought it up.
Okay.
Like nobody would have found out until I stream with my boyfriend, and I would have introduced him, out of common courtesy. I wouldn't have brought it up. And if when it got brought up, if people had been like, "Oh, you're not clearly not really gay," I wouldn't have even insisted on it. Because at that point, that's just being the guy you accuse everyone else of being. When you're denying somebody that factor of themselves because it's a political inconvenience. As I had a brain fart. What was your second question?
Do you think that there's nothing inherently political about 40k? Like, it sort of just exists in an apolitical vacuum?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we can quote. We have quotes from Rick Priestley. We have quotes from Andy Chambers. I mean, I know the common argument is it started as satire and then was no longer satire because they stopped trying to write it as satire. But the problem is, you can quote Andy Chambers and his not Andy Chambers, Rick Priestley, and his direct reason he started making 40k. He made 40k for Games Workshop, and none of it had to do with trying to make a political satire.
Okay. Well, media exists outside of what a creator intends for it. There's sort of this implicit statement made by creators, publishers of tabletop games, that as soon as you push something out, it's not really yours anymore. It's sort of the community's. And as 40k exists, it is excellent satire of is basically the worst of any political ideologies. It's the worst of fascism within the Imperium. You go to the Teen Stealer cult and you have, like, this is the problem with a communist party starting with a vanguard party. Every faction has something like this along this lines. You could say that Chaos is both a representation of, like, the bad pull of the forces of the universe, but it's also kind of like, this is the problem with excess in anything. There's a lot of messages that you could glean from 40k. It's sort of always been baked into the system, and even the writers themselves, if they say that they don't intend for something to be in there, sometimes it bleeds into by accident. These are people who grew up in Thatcher's Britain. Like, that was heavily influential at the time. It would have been in the back of their minds when they made this. So they can say that their intention is not to do this, but the boys created really good satire for not seeking out to do so. I mean, I think what's the opening line? Like, wasn't this the opening for, even back when Rogue Trader was, to exist in the Imperium of Man is to exist in the most brutal regime that has ever been. Like, that's a pretty strong statement. A statement to the politics of the Imperium. I mean, you can push that to the wayside, by the way. Like, I'm not saying that anybody who enjoys 40k is, like, implicitly enabling things like fascism. You can play a game and have that removed from your mind. Like, people could be upset with me that I play the Imperial Guard and they're like, oh, well, those are the foot soldiers of the big fascist regime. I'm like, I just think they're neat. I can have the satire exist within my mind and then also enjoy playing the game as a game. I don't think politics is necessarily as much of a dirty word as people make it out to be.
Okay. Real quick, just as a small aside, I can say at least, Shay, that before we continue this, you at least have at least a more civil take on a lot of this than some people on your side. I mean,
Twitter tends to turn everybody into a monster that's just the engagement machine.
That's fair enough. I mean, I'm good IRL friends with some of the people on the Shudhammer side of it, and I've seen them both give and receive death threats, despite the fact that I've told them that it's fucking stupid and they should not be doing that. But that's neither here nor there, and just a small, tangent of mine, and I apologize for doing that. That's not my job as a moderator. Bowman, do you have anything else you'd like to continue with?
Yeah. Well, first of all, other than cursing slow-mo mode,
I'm sorry about that. I should have given you the ability to.
you're trying to maintain civility, bro. It's okay. Just give me 2 seconds and I'll make a rebuttal.
Sure.
Okay, I wanted to get those. I wanted to get that link, those 2 images out before I said anything. Okay, yeah, I recognize where you're coming from, Shay. That is the death of the author argument, which is unfortunately more about, it's more about supposed to be more about the ability of the author to, to make amends to their work after publication, as opposed to say, take the definition and the meaning of a work away from the author and put it in the hands of the audience. As in, to draw a very, very good example, J.K. Rowling and her continuous nonstop retcons of Harry Potter on Twitter.com. If you know what I'm talking about in that regard.
Oh yeah, the very famous Dumbledore is gay
Dumbledore's
now.
gay.
By the way,
Yeah, Dumbledore.
How?
Yeah, which even when I was younger, it was like you could have just written it. But anyway, but more to the point. The problem with the okay, maybe they didn't say it, but intrinsic bias argument is that political fiction intended to be satire, fiction intended to be political. It's not something that can happen on accident. And it's also something that the author or the creator can fail at. I'll fully acknowledge that. The best example of that is the Starship Troopers movie. Paul Verhoeven reads one chapter of Starship Troopers, decides it's all fascist bullshit, decides he'll make an adaptation that makes fun of, fascism, and makes a completely prejudice-free, libertarian society that just has strong military. Completely fumbling any message he was trying to make. It's like, oh yeah, he put Doogie Howser and Hugo Boss uniforms, but at the end of the day, skin deep aesthetics do not a satire make. That's a simple truth right there. The problem with trying to say that 40k is inherently satirical, even if the authors aren't trying to make it satirical, is that now you have to couch that in something other than interpretation, because the problem with interpretation is it's a goldfish that can't survive outside the bowl. And because an interpretation is ultimately yours, but you can't use that as an objective thing. I've joked about the parallels between gene stealer cults and communism before. I mean, of course I'm going to make those jokes. You know me. But at the end of the day, I'm making a joke. When I look at gene stealer cults, say gene stealer cults as a faction, they're not trying to make a parallel to communism. That's very clear, because at the end of the day, communists aren't alien bug monsters from beyond the galaxy that infect you at a genetic level, that makes you want to have kids to make more infected people, to create a snowball effect to where ultimately the infected people outnumber the actual humans. The problem with interpretation is it has to be couched in something real in the narrative. Or the problem with saying it's political has to be couched with something real in the narrative, and not just oh well, maybe I can see it as. And this is why the argument that the Imperium, well, the most brutal regime imaginable. I mean, for starters, you can see Imperium worlds, and they pop up all the time in the fiction of 40k in various books, like Brothers of the Snake, the Eisenhorn novels, the Ravenor novels are good examples. Double Eagle. Just lots of novels show up where everything was, fine. The governments that are, because the Imperium is ultimately not fascist, because it is incredibly decentralized. It's it's a feudal. It is. Let's see. What is the actual full definition? What was the actual full definition? Feudal, tributary, oligarchical empire, theocratic empire. Because ultimately, worlds rule them. This is like something I've been saying forever. Worlds rule themselves. Except when the taxpayers show up, you never see the Imperium. And there are worlds that are literal democracies, like the best of modern Earth in the Imperium. I mean, the Imperium itself, its core government, is ultimately a form of democracy. It's an oligarchical democracy made up of, representatives of organizations that, with the way the Imperium is structured, are more or less separate nations in their own right. And in order for the Imperium to be a satire of fascism, well, it needs to actually satirize fascism, and that's the great problem with trying to say it is one. Because when you're trying to say, oh, it's satire of fascism because of xenophobia, well, okay, it canonically, all the aliens shot first during the Dark Age of technology. That's why the Emperor and humanity hate aliens. Because when humanity was down, they kicked them in the gut. It's like, okay, so hatred of, mutants and other religions. And it's like, these are religions that worship reality-devouring, extra-dimensional warp tumors that want to consume all of existence. Oh, well, they're prejudiced towards psychers. I mean, I'm pretty certain if I was in the room with a guy who was a different race than me, his head's not going to explode and become a portal for demons. And the problem with stating all this is satire is that it's so patently ridiculous and at the same time justifying of the way the Imperium views things. Rick Priestley himself said it. The Imperium is the way it is because the galaxy around them forced them to be that way. And even when they tried to be better, when the Emperor tried to make humanity better, Chaos found a way to worm in and ruin it all. Like, that's what 40k is trying to say. It's a narrative couched in the existence of the universe they created, and not a parallel to the real world. The problems that the Imperium faces, nothing
you're running short on time. Just
I'm about to finish. I know.
Sure.
The problems the Imperium faces, we don't have problems on that level in reality, and that's just a simple fact.
Okay. So a lot of it at the end there was just a Thermian argument, just to sort of explain why you think that it's okay that they are the way that they are, which is fine. You can hold that to you. But specifically that last bit of the way that you described their efforts in the story to, like, even when they get better, that dang Chaos came around and now they just have to do this. Do you really not see the the real life political parallel of that sort of thing? Like, as much as Chaos does come in to fuck things up, it is sort of just a way of the world, and whatever's in the warp is sort of a reflection of whatever's in the material realm. But specifically just that whole, like, well, we'd like to be better, but damn, you're just forcing our hand at every turn with this. That describes the final solution. That was their justification for that thing. Like, you could find real life parallels all day long for some of this, and if you want examples that are actually in the story, you could have Gilliman talking about how much he laments what the Imperium has become. That is a direct statement from somebody at the founding of the Imperium as it is today, to be like, none of this is what we intended. It's all gone wrong. You used the example of Starship Troopers. Like, do you actually know, like, the real-life political views of Robert A. Heinlein? He believed in militarism. Like, he believed that there was a moral decline in the United States. Like, that the country that was the strongest military in the world, the country that's produced the greatest generations, technically beat the Nazis, he saw that there was some kind of moral decline between that generation and ones after. That's why he sort of wrote, like, his message could be whatever it is. I've not read the entirety of what Starship Troopers is in and of itself, but the themes that are in the book, from what I've read so far, it's basically a statement of militarism, whole, like, might makes right sort of ideology. That's what I mean by you can get a surface level look at the media that you consume, but if you applied, like, just the shallowest critical thinking, you could find these things. It's not like I'm making this stuff up out of nowhere. I forgot the very beginning of your point when you had first started. I remember it up until Starship Troopers. Sorry.
I think part of what he was trying to describe is that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Bohemond, I think you were saying that the interpretation that a lot of this was about how people misuse the concept of death of the author.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's what it was. That was another thing I wanted to say. When it comes to use of death of the author, people who engage with fiction, finding their own meaning within the fiction, that isn't necessarily death of the author. Death of the author has to pertain specifically to removing the author themselves and their influences into the work to try to engage with it in a author agnostic way. Like, it's typically, like, you would say the same thing. What you had done to describe Starship Troopers, that is 100% death of the author. That is an act of denying, just to see what we can see with a new examination of the work. If we take Heinlein's views out of it, what can we find? It's very difficult to do that for that example, but to do so would be an action of death of the author. But just reading fiction and getting your own interpretation of it, having it hit you in a certain way, like, you know, I don't know, it's like, I guess a really popular one could be The Matrix. A lot of people say that, like, I think even the creators, I don't know if the creators have said this, I don't know if the twins have actually come out and say this since they've transitioned, but I believe they once alluded to The Matrix being a trans allegory. But you can take the story that The Matrix is, and you can apply whatever the feeling you got while watching and enjoying it to be a legitimate read of the fiction. It's just your interpretation of it. That's not necessarily death of the author, that's just engaging with fiction in a way that matters to you.
Okay. I think there was one little bit of miscommunication there. I think that you're referring to specifically the interpretation of the author of the novels of Starship Troopers. Bohemond was talking about how the director of the movie completely missed the point of the novels, in a sense.
Yeah.
And created something completely different to mock the original author's views.
I can restate if you want.
Sure.
Yeah, my point was that when Paul Verhoeven read he read one chapter of the book, threw it out, and then decided to mock the author by satirizing fascism, and then ultimately the setting he created is not only not fascist but completely justifies the Federation.
Except for maybe the opening statement. the opening video that was a joke that was really bad. But anyway, continue. Sorry, not supposed to interject.
Right, but yeah, it's well, I mean, you bring up, the is this my time to make a rebuttal?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure before I go off for too long. Thank you. Well, I'd say ultimately the ultimate problem with that definition of death of the author and the Thermian argument in and of itself is that they're copes. Because to try and say a fictional setting can't couch itself in the world it's built, and that it has to relate to reality somehow, and that is how it must be looked at, is a cope, because authors, at the end of the day, they're not necessarily going to be trying to copy reality. Even settings rooted in a future of our time aren't necessarily going to be doing that. The idea that that any and all art is inherently political is fallacy. Because, and this is what it boils down to, the author's intent matters. And when you try to remove, when you say, well, death of the author, the reason I say that's a cope is because the only way to justify the idea that it's somehow inherently political is to remove the source. You're like, it's like when you see people it's like when you see localizers for anime trying to say, oh, that's not what the creator meant, that's why we need localizers. It's like, he wrote it, it's in his language. You're an American translating another man's language and another man's work. And this is the principle applies with, when you're trying to take a setting and try to impress politics upon it. You're trying to say, well, this is what the author really meant. And it's like, well, again, you're couching it in the idea that the only way to do this is to say, well, what the author really meant didn't matter. So if we're like, I posted a little bit up, like, gotta let go of the push to talk to scroll up. I just want to quote it. Hold on. Okay, so Rick Priestley, quoting Rick Priestley. And this is in the article above, which I linked if you want to read the source. The original book certainly combined a dystopic and violent universe with humor. Perhaps the irony was rather heavy-handed, and maybe the humor verges on the silly in places. But I was writing a book about war games for wargamers, and not aiming for literary credibility. And just as well, you might reasonably say. My approach has always been to combine high and low styles together. Sometimes that was to evoke a deliberate clash intended to remind us that this is all pretend and we should not take it too seriously. I probably couldn't resist the gag. Now that's Rick Priestley on his motivation for creating Warhammer. He wanted to make a war game, and like a war game for wargamers, his own words. Now, a little bit below that, we got Andy Chambers. We got a quote from Reddit. This is about, Gaskell Magaruk Thraka being a Margaret Thatcher reference, which, Reddit loves to upvote that. And the guy gets massively downvoted for saying otherwise. Well, Andy Chambers on Facebook had the following to say. I share my response here for general amusement and edification. The real answer is far more arcane than that. In the early 80s, my friends and I used to do live role play. It wasn't called that then, but that's what it became in later years. We played monsters a lot, particularly orcs, so we worked out basic orcish based on the bits of black speech in Lord of the Rings, so we could communicate without the adventurers understanding what we said. In the framework, Magaruk Thraka equals Big Orc Leader. Gaskell equals Metal Skull. Coincidentally, the son we called Gashkull or Fire Skull. No Maggie involved. We were doing our best to forget about the Wicked Witch. So you've got confirmation there from Andy Chambers of the desire for escapism and not the desire to insert politics. I mean, you can even confirm with, multiple sources from GW themselves and the character what Gaskell's name means, and it lines up with what Chambers said in that screen cap. So when you're trying to impress, the Thuramine argument and Death of the Author to try to say, well, okay, Warhammer is actually political, you're trying to let your goldfish loose in the lake. The goldfish being your interpretation, the lake being effectively the truth here. And you can have an interpretation, but you have to stop and realize my interpretation dies outside my own head. The goldfish can't live in the lake. I mean, and as I've said, I've got my interpretations, I've got my own headcanons, and of course I recognize they're just mine. I'm willing to, I am more than willing to acknowledge that this barrier exists, because at the end of the day, Warhammer is not my work. I can't define what Warhammer is. Only the men who wrote it can do that. And the men who wrote it have said very plainly, it's not political.
Okay. Now, before Shay, you say anything, and I'm going to give you the chance to speak if you want to, but we are technically past like the whole total hour that I wanted to take up by a couple minutes. You guys can continue if you want, and as long as we keep this level of civility, I won't cut it off. But that's up to you guys. Entirely up to you. You can still, regardless of what happens, you want to give one last response, you're free to do so. But we have hit that time limit, and I don't want to drag this on more than we have to, because, that's at this point, it not saying that it's going to devolve into it, but, it could devolve into that. And I don't, you know what I'm saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to continue. If we're gonna formally end the debate, I'll end my stream there, because the stream was for the debate. So I mean, if you'd prefer I end the stream at that point, Shay, that's cool. I understand if you'd want me to.
No, you can do whatever you want. I didn't even expect this level of structure to all this, so whatever's fine.
I wanted it to be structured because, again, like I said, I didn't want this to be the only time we had this open discourse, and I wanted to make it clear that should anybody ever want to talk to us again, I will be holding us to, at the very minimum, this standard going forward. So this wasn't just a structured for the sake of being structured kind of thing. This was structured to show that, yes, despite my arguments with you guys, I do actually want to extend the olive branch here. I want to try to make it seem like we're all adults, we're all people, we all have the right to be treated with at least some respect, as long as we don't do anything to take that away, to justify that being taken away. Like, if you're a complete asshole to me, if you tell me to kill myself, I'm not gonna sit here and justify, being polite to you. But at the same time, if you don't do that, I'm going to give you the same level of respect that I should anybody else. I've been a little bit toxic in the past. I'm pretty sure all of us have been toxic. I'm gonna stop trying to do that, because I want to prove that this is about, again, this Discord will stay up with the intent of staying civil. If you want to invite people here, if you want to have a discussion, I can invite people here. I can open up another debate, schedule it, give people the roles, schedule times, find a moderator if you can't find one. I'll moderate again if I need to. It's whatever. This is just going forward. This is going to be the plan. Tell anybody on your side that would be interested in this. Tell anybody and we have people on our side who are always willing to have a debate. Doesn't have to be Marshall. It could be somebody else. We've had this, and I want to make sure that people understand. As much as I dislike some of your political views and all of that, I still respect the fact that you're people that enjoy the hobby and have a strong opinion, and sometimes want to make sure that your opinion is not misunderstood. So I will keep this Discord for that. But anyway, Shay, you have the floor to respond to Marshall again.
Yeah, for a lot of what you said, my argument wasn't to imply that was the original creator's intent. They made clear their intent. I even said before that wasn't what I was trying to do. I said that I think that what had happened is that I mean, very clearly, who's the first quote? I'm sorry, who's that attributed to? It begins with the original book certainly combined a dystopic.
Oh, that is Rick Priestley, the chief writer for he was the guy that basically the main writer who came up with Warhammer 40k. The quote, so just so you know, I'm not pulling shit out my ass on you here. The quote is from the link just a little bit above. It was posting the link and the image was delayed by slow-mo.
That makes sense. Yeah, no, I agree with what Rick says here. I think that he did a really good job doing what he set out to do with combining high and low ideas. I think that when he alludes to that, he's talking about high ideas might be not entirely what he was going on. Literary. He says literary credibility. He wasn't aiming for anything highfalutin. But he added a little bit of that and combined it with low ideas, sillier aspects of the thing. We all know that 40k is bonkers as all hell. It involves a fungal species of soccer hooligans that, if they believe hard enough, whatever they think comes to life. It's silly. It's just silly. But I think they also sort of accidentally created really good satire. I don't think that it's necessarily their goal to have done so. I think that most everybody can look at the 40k universe and go like, I wouldn't want to live there. And it does look like some ideologies I've seen in real life taken to their natural, most extreme point. I mean, I think we all agree that 40k is like the most extreme that anything can be for grimdark. So yeah, it wasn't really my argument that I'm trying to replace their intention and insert my own. I'm saying that I think now, as the setting exists, after these people have been somewhat removed from it from quite a while now, looking at 40k as it is, as the people who currently write for it, publish all of the stuff for it, there is a little bit of that in the back of their minds because of how long it's been around, how long people have talked about it, how long people have mistakenly thought that Ghazghkull Throck is Margaret Thatcher. It's a thought in the back of the mind. It's an interpretation. It's an incredibly valid interpretation, considering that, to be honest with you, there's a lot of discourse going on right now about, like, oh, I don't think 40k is good enough satire. I think it's fucking brilliant satire because there are so many people who don't see it. It's a lightning rod for some people who think that they're apolitical, who think that they can sort of just, that this 40k exists only as escapism. It can for them, but there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on. That's what I mean by a lot of this seems to be like a surface level interpretation of it. I don't do that. There's a lot of interesting things going on in the setting. I think it's worth looking at, but I'm not going to take that too seriously, you know? Like, I'm not going to suddenly think that Rick Priestley created, like, some great literary work. I'm not going, well, I think it's cool. But, you know what I mean? I'm not going to, like, declare it to be, like, Lolita in terms of having a hard statement to make about something. This is neat, and people can glean a really good message from it. That was my point in bringing up that I think that 40k is satire. I think it's just a valid interpretation of the setting. Oh, and in that second quote, I'm really bad with names. Andy Chambers. Second quote where he says, we were trying to forget about the Wicked Witch. I mean, that just sort of tells you right there how sort of oppressive the politics of the time were to these people, that they wanted to create the setting in the way that they did. That's why I think it's very accidental. These people wanted to create something that was just a really brilliant war game that was really just fucking fun, dude. But it ekes in, you know. They wanted to make a world that was a little bit more than what they could push into it directly, if that makes any sense. Does that make any sense? because a lot of creators in tabletop spaces will talk about they create their setting and then everybody else sort of brings it into its own. It sort of matures once it interacts with the fan base. I think that's just sort of what happened there.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Like, it resonates with people, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I see what you're trying to say here. I'd say the problem, though, is that like at the end of the day, people who want to have their political interpretation need to stop, check themselves, and accept that I have an interpretation, but that's not what it is. I mean, at the end of the day, it's kind of a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of like a self-defeating statement. The idea, accidental satire. I mean, when you've got the creator of a character saying about Margaret Thatcher, wow, fuck this bitch, I don't want her anywhere near me when I'm playing our RPG orc characters, but accidentally brought it in anyway. I mean,
oh no, I don't think that Gazgulthrak is Margaret Thatcher. I think that's literally just a coincidence. I don't bring that specific example up to say that, like, this is an example of it being accidentally applied. I'm saying, like, that's probably people jumping the gun a little bit because of their interpretation of the setting.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the point I'm making is that people are free to, like, see, people are free to, like, make their interpretations. I mean, I'll just say, like, now, I mean, if you go on my Twitch channel and look at, I made a clip a while back, early when I started streaming, where I take a little dig at somebody concerning gene stealer cults, and I'll be the first to say, yeah, I made an interpretation. I also don't actually believe that. Like, I brought up earlier how, you can certainly see gene stealers as, like, a reference to communism, but I don't think gene stealers are at all referential of communism. They're completely imaginary. They're completely imaginary alien species. It's like the, dumbass weeboo space communist meme you're probably aware for Tau, I do not believe the Tau are communist. I believe, well, absolutely, when you're writing a fictional setting, for example, if you're going to create a fictional government, it's going to be a type of government that we can classify based on things we know in real life. Like, I said earlier, the Imperium is, the Imperium is a, oh no, my throat is dry as fuck. I apologize for that. I was saying that the Imperium is, the common interpretation is that it's fascist, and that this is wrong, because if you look at how the Imperium government is structured, an incredible decentralized theocratic empire ruled by an oligarchy that is, feudal in its structure. Nothing in the Imperium as a political structure coincides with fascism as defined by Benito Mussolini. Now, obviously, like, say, take the Tau Empire, for example, the common joke is that they're communist. And that...
I will say, just for historical context, because I really, really like history, and this is a common mistake that people make because of what the Allies did at the end of the war. It is really, really bad to take people like Benito Mussolini, Hitler, the Field Marshal General Staff of Germany, with their interpretation of fascism, because after the war they sort of were asked to write a lot of primary source material, and that's where we get a lot of our misconceptions about the war. It's kind of infamous among historians right now. It's bad to take the people who create some of the most brutal regimes that we have ever seen in our history at their word. I mean, you got the common mistake that people make about the Nazis is that, like, oh, they're totally socialist. the only reason that it's in the name is because the Nazi Party, I forget what each part of that acronym means, they were trying to co-opt a popular movement in Germany in order to get popular themselves. When they got into power in practice, they did very little that actually implemented a socialist government, which is, in fact, why I specified that when I was talking about the Teen Stealer cults specifically, and how they can be pretty good satire of things like communism. It's specifically really good satire of things like the what do they call it? The Winter Revolution, September Revolution, basically what created the USSR. Because you have this popular revolution that managed to overthrow the largest landmass of a country on planet Earth, and wanted to create a communist government, and it failed miserably. It created another brutal regime. It created another dictatorship. It created something that was completely different than any of the anything that Marx wrote, certainly. Like these are things that sort of you can draw pretty solid parallels between this, because pretty much Gene Stealer cults, they're misled to believe that what they're doing is for the benefit of something. There's a really horrifying detail about Gene Stealer cults is that by the time they get disconnected from the mind control, get disconnected from thinking that what they're doing is the right thing, they suddenly
they're plunging into the bio schools.
Yeah, the Tyranids do that last little bit of terror just to fuck with them. That's kind of a really good way to look at what the USSR ended up becoming. You have all of these people who are like, oh my god, we're going to finally create an entirely new system of government different than what in the entirety of the rest of the world is doing, and we're going to emphasize personal freedoms, and then it creates a dictatorship. That would be nightmarish. I can't imagine what living at that time in Russia would have been like for the average citizen. That must have been so depressing within the next decade to see what it would become, and that's, I don't know, you can draw these lines pretty solidly. I don't think that, it's anybody's intention to make a one-to-one comparison. It's fantasy, after all. But you can draw from history, particularly in a wargame. Wargame has a history of drawing from a historical context to present itself. You can draw that, and you can create incredible fiction based off of ideas that totally exist in the real world today.